Hey, Dave talked last week about the fact that we are exiles, right? First Peter, we're kind of walking through the fact that we are foreigners, that we are traveling through, that our home is not here, our home is in heaven. And in fact, he even talked about Daniel and how Daniel had to experience being in exile and that it wasn't his home, but he had to figure out how not only to be homesick, but also to be happy in that. And it's pretty true that all of us at some point in our lives feel a little bit out of place. In fact, I've been married for 18 years now to my best friend. Her name is Molly. I have 3 daughters. This is a picture of my fam right here. And so we're just hanging out. A little tame. Let's go to like what we normally look like, which is, all right, that's a little bit more like it. You'll notice that my father-in-law right there has an Ohio State shirt on. We're from Cleveland. I-O. There you go, buddy. All right, there you go. So, and I told God, man, God, please, like, I'll go wherever you want me to. And I'm in Ann Arbor now. I am desperately falling in love with the city of Ann Arbor, to be honest with you. But in so many ways, I do feel like the visiting team in a very literal sense. I was invited to a game. Kevin Davis and the Davis family hooked me up with some tickets. And so about a month and a half after I got here, I went to a football game. And man, did I feel out of place. You know, I wasn't even wearing any gear, but I just felt like I was going to get stabbed or something. I don't know what was going on. And so I kind of sat down. And there's just all of this stuff going on, right? When you are the visiting team like we are as believers in this culture, we might get the cheap seats. We might... We represent the visiting team, so we might get booed. We might even get insulted. So, how do we follow Jesus in a culture that doesn't? In fact, how do we respond to a culture that's hostile? Because there are so many amazing ways to respond, but then again, there are so many unbiblical, poor ways to respond. Let's check this out.
So imagine it this way. Imagine that you're new in town and that you're moving into this house at the end of a cul-de-sac. You visited the local church before you moved in, and you told somebody about where you were moving, and you found out that they lived in that neighborhood too. And when they found out where you were living at the end of this cul-de-sac, they said, "Oh, you better watch out because that cul-de-sac where you're living, it's going to be kind of rough for you." And they start telling you about your neighbors, and you find out you've got one neighbor over here, and that couple, you can hear them fighting and cussing at each other. And they got this bumper sticker with a little Darwin fish on the back of their car, kind of mocking Christianity. That's one neighbor. And then on the other side, you've got the same-sex couple over here. And then you've got another couple where he's an alcoholic, and he stumbles in all hours of the night and leaves his beer cans all over the porch. So how are you going to respond moving into the neighborhood? What are you going to do? There are a lot of Christians who would take the option of, well, I'm just going to fit in. I'm going to make sure that they don't know that I'm a Christian. I don't want to make anybody upset, and I don't really want to rock the boat. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable, so I'm going to go undercover. Or there are those other Christians who are just all about it. And they put it in their face, and they put some turn or burn signs in their yard, and they steal their Darwin fish under the cover of the night. Which one are you?
I love the Darwin fish. You can just imagine somebody, oh, you'll get that off your car, you know? And so, hey, so a couple of unbiblical responses. Let's address those. The first one is to appease culture, to just kind of get along with everyone. And we don't need to share anything that's going on in our life, and we don't need to share our faith, because we really want everyone to like us. And if we just didn't talk about our faith, everyone would really like us. Or we just don't really want to offend anyone, and we just kind of want to go with the flow. Some churches have even done this over time. Over time, they have changed their faith commitments and their doctrine, and they've changed as culture has changed. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that next week, but that's to appease, to just get along and let's not ruffle any feathers. The second is to attack. And unfortunately, Christians can be brutal in the assault of those who do not identify as Christians. Christians can be absolutely wretched in the way that we point our fingers and we say, oh, look at the stuff they're doing. Oh, look how godless they are. And even in some of the ways that we may beat people over the heads in debating and throwing our Bible at them, and we need to beat them over the heads, and then they'll love Jesus. Or in some of the responses that make me cringe on social media. It becomes an extremely us, very holy, pious, all of us, versus them. Very sinful heathens. Self-righteous. It's not the gospel. And so then what's the balance? What should it look like? Well, we would say this week that Peter is saying that we need to be humble and holy. That we need to figure out what it looks like to be holy yet walk in humility. In the time that Peter was writing this letter, it was a time of horrific persecution of Christians. It was a time of Nero. You may know a little bit about Nero. He was the man who burned Rome down. And he just thought, well, if I burn Rome down, then I can build it up bigger and better. And this fire lasted 9 days. And so then when the people whose lives were being destroyed decided to rebel and blame Nero, Nero said, oh, I need to find someone to blame. And so he blamed Christians. And so began the complete inhumane persecution of Christians. So at the time that this letter was written, Christians were being persecuted in a way that is almost unspeakable. Some Christians were being sewn into the skins of wild animals and then being hunted down by dogs and when caught, eaten alive. Some Christians were given shirts stiff with wax and then burned alive and used as candles all throughout Nero's majestic gardens. Even Peter, who's the author of this letter, was crucified upside down under the persecution of Nero. And so Peter's saying in this letter, how do we respond? How do we respond in a culture that is just so hostile? And so if you have your Bible or your Bible app, we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 1, and we'll kind of pick it up in verse 13. Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. And the phraseology there, alert and fully sober. My oldest daughter, Bella, is learning how to drive, and she has a driver's permit. And when she's in the driver's seat and I'm in the passenger seat, alert and fully sober starts to make sense. And there's just something about that experience that I feel like an X-Men with like heightened abilities, you know? There's the ability to anticipate horrific danger and dangerous situations. So she'll be in the driver's seat, I'm in the passenger seat, and I'll just say, look out for that guy. What? What's going on? Well, he's by that tree. You can have a chainsaw, chop it down, you're dead. You can stop here and take a left at the light. Excellent. Or I have the heightened sense of being able to hear danger miles away. And so she'll be in the driver's seat driving. I'm in the passenger seat holding on to something. And then I'll look over and she'll go, what? I go, oh, I thought I heard a stampede of bulls. It's fine. I also can see things that are invisible. So she's in the driver's seat, I'm in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden I am looking for the invisible brake pedal over here. Oh, okay, no, you're good. And then finally, I have the uncanny ability to repeat things with lightning speed. She's driving on the passenger seat, and I'll go, all right, that's good. Here comes a light. Look, watch out, look, ah! Oh, we're good. Yep, the light right here, excellent. And that is not what the Bible is describing. In fact, the Bible is not describing me on edge and in fear. That's not what sober and alert looks like. But what it does look like is just being aware and paying attention to what's going around and what's going on in culture. It means not burying our heads in the sand. Hoping, thinking it'll be all right. We'll just ignore it. We need to be alert and sober. Let's keep reading. Verse 14, as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. Feelings and desires and obedience. In my own life, I've struggled with that. In my own life, I've thought, wow, there's just so many times where God asked me to do something and I don't really feel like it. Okay, God, I'll get around to it. I don't really feel like it. Because I desire to do this over there, but that is not being obedient to a father as a child. And when I started really digging into that, I started thinking, well, what does it look like when I'm a dad and my kids and I want them to be obedient? Well, two things strike me. The first one is attitude. When I tell one of my kids, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you wash the dishes? And, I'm kind of expecting oh, yes, sir. Yeah, no problem. Get right on it. Instead, I normally go, and if I get an eye roll, if there's an eye roll in there, I'm just like, waka! That's one eye. I'd use the other eye to go wash those dishes. But I'm the exact same way. What's my attitude like when God is asking me to do something? Somebody needs help moving from their home, and I'm like, I guess I'll help. I'm just going to get there a little later. Hopefully some of the stuff is done. So that's attitude. The second is timing. Timing. When I ask one of my kids, will you go do the dishes? I just expect that they'll just go get it done right then. But if I come back a couple hours later and they're not done, I'm frustrated. And then I realized that delayed obedience is disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience when God is asking me to do something and I'm just like, man, okay, God, somebody needs me to talk to them or somebody's going through a rough time. Yeah, absolutely, I'm going to get to that. But man, I have 2 more episodes of Blacklist to get through tonight. And when I think of that verse, I just think, I need to be obedient. And I think about the timing and the attitude I have to have around that. And what does that look like in my life in this culture? Let's keep reading. Verse 15, but remember this, as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. And Peter is saying that there is a mold that we should fit, and that mold is the holiness of God. And the holiness of God does not change. It does not shift. It isn't revised. It isn't amended. God is saying, be set apart because I am set apart. I want you to be different because this isn't your home. I want you to be holy. But so much of the time, we just want to look like everyone else looks. And we want to act the way everyone else acts. And we want to watch the things they do. And we want to say the things they do. And we want to dress the way culture says we should dress because we don't want to stand out. We don't want to stick out. And God's telling us to be set apart. Let's keep reading. Since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. For you know that it is not with perishable things such as silver and gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him, you believe in God who raised him from the dead and glorified him. And so your faith and hope are in God. And he's telling us to point to Jesus, that our hope should be in a loving God. It should not be in a job. Our hope should not be in a paycheck. Our hope should not be in a position or that significant other that we hope to have. Our hope should not be in our own abilities. Our hope should not even be in our own faith because our faith wavers. Our hope should be in the object of our faith, who is Jesus Christ, who died for us, who rose again and is making a home for us. Our hope should not land on the size of our bank account and things that perish. And when we think about who our hope is in, we can't miss what he has done for us, which then leads us to say that hope should spark humility. Let's read about it. Verse 22, now you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for each other. Love one another deeply from the heart. And here's what Peter is saying. To love one another and to love one another takes humility and dying to self. All throughout 1 Peter, over and over again, you see humility, humility. In chapter 5, there's this beautiful phrase. He says to clothe yourself in humility. And when I start thinking about that, it sounds great, but what does that look like? Well, if we know over here, pride is us thinking way more of ourselves than we should. And we also know that over here, then self-deprecating and belittling and insecurity is thinking of ourselves as much less than we should. Then humility is simply seeing ourselves as we are, as God sees us. Broken yet healed. Sinful yet forgiven. Having amazing abilities, but understanding that we did not give ourselves those abilities. And when we think about what humility is, then the opposite of humility then is entitlement. Is walking around holy and saying, man, we're owed all of these things. Look how holy we are. Look how great we are. When in fact, no one owes us anything. In fact, we owe everything. Well, Tito, then humility inside the church, within the church walls, we should have a standard of holiness. We need to uphold that standard. Yeah, but do we need to go up to other people we have no idea what's going on in their lives and point out sin in their lives? We risk the whole plankism, right? Trying to remove a speck from someone's eye, and there's a plank in ours. And so what we go around judging people, and we're talking about this person in church and calling this person out or secretly judging them. Really, it should look like, and this is what we forget, it should look like getting permission from people to speak into their life. And with permission means that you have a relationship with people. So there are people within the church who you have the right and the ability to love and to speak truth into, but they should be people who you have a relationship, who have given you permission. So potentially in your small groups, people who you have developed relationships with. But just remember that as you are sharpening them, then you are also being sharpened, and that your heart should be open for them to speak into your life. And when we think outside of the church, well, Tito, yeah, but all those people outside of the church. Well, the people outside of the church, we're doing our very best to judge them quietly, I guess. Or maybe we're holding signs up in front of places telling them how they're going to hell. Peter says that we will be known by our love, by our action. That instead of yelling and even judging secretly because it makes us feel so much better about ourselves, that we should be loving people. So then how do we represent Christ's holiness in humility? Which is the balance that we're talking about. What does that look like? Well, I would say it's the very opposite of the cul-de-sac video that we just saw. It's the very opposite of that. In fact, we should be a blessing to others. If they will know us by our love, then we should be a blessing to others. And if you have spent any time in our spiritual formation classes, then you probably have heard this. And if not, then I would strongly encourage you to get into those spiritual formation classes. But we talk about being a blessing to people outside of the church all the time. In fact, we actually use the word bless. For the B is to say begin with prayer. What a lovely thing. That when we see someone in our life, whether it's at work or at the gym or a family member or a friend, and we see that their decisions are leading them to destruction, before we do anything else, we should be praying for them. We should be asking God, my heart is breaking right now for them. Would you please soften their heart and please help them understand that what they're doing is hurting. Father, bring them closer to you. We need to begin with prayer. And then we need to listen. We need to have conversations where we're not throwing all of this stuff all over them. We need to take a moment and listen to their hurts and to their pains and to their struggles and how they've been abused. If we were to listen, our hearts would break while we listen rather than our fingers pointing. And then we need to eat, which is so my favorite part. And it sounds silly, I get it, but the Bible talks about eating together so much, even in Acts 2:42. When's the last time you invited a coworker and their family over to your house to meet your family and to grab a meal? You just clock in, hey Bob, clock out, bye Bob. When's the last time you had some people over your home? When's the last time you sat with people and just before you met with them, you prayed for them and then you listened to them while you ate with them and then you served them? Now, I'm really coming up with brand new ideas here, so I'm going to copyright these. But what would it look like to serve the people in your life? To see a need and then meet a need. Maybe when you talk to one of your coworkers and they're struggling, maybe you find out that their spouse was just diagnosed with cancer. You don't know how they're going to pay some of their medical bills, and maybe you go to your small group, or maybe you link up a few small groups and you come together to pay a month's rent for them. What would that look like? And then you have the opportunity to share. Yes, share the things that you have, but more importantly, share your story. Share what God has done in your life. Share who you were before you knew God and who you are now, and that you're still broken, but you are forgiven, and that you were hopeless, and now you have a hope. And just saying those words because you've earned the right to, because you've prayed for them, and because you've listened, and you grab the bite with them, and you serve them, they will know you. They will know you, and they will know your hope. Not that our hope is not in a vote, and our hope is not in the next Supreme Court justice, and our hope is not in the next law passed, and it's not in the textbooks that our kids are reading from, and it's not even in the 24-hour news cycles that fearmonger, but that we have a hope in Jesus Christ, who sits on his throne, who loves us and cares for us, and is working for us even now, even when we don't see it. I tell my students that they have a choice. Student community, high school, Sunday night, middle school, all throughout the weekend. And recently I told them that they have a choice. They can either be a thermometer or a thermostat. Let me explain. They can either choose that when they go into their classroom, and when they go onto their sports team, and when they go into their friend cliques, and they enter that environment, that they can either choose to just become whatever the temperature is. They can start looking like them and acting like them and talking like them because they just want to mold into whatever that is. I'm just going to, whatever the temperature is, I'm going to become it. Or they can choose to be a thermostat and set the temperature. So that's my challenge to you all today. In this culture, in your worlds, in your communities, in your circles, will you just simply watch what people watch and say what people say and agree with the way people agree with and dress the way they dress and act the way they act? Will you be set apart and set the temperature yourself? And what would it look like to be a visiting team that were a bunch of thermostats? What would it look like for a visiting team that when insulted does not insult back? What would it look like to be a visiting team that when booed finds it in them to encourage? What does it look like for a visiting team that when someone is trying to find fault in your life that you don't have it because you're representing Christ so well? What does it look like to have love and joy and peace and self-control? We need to understand that the way we react to the world and to culture will cause them to change